Now, looking at tissues, the biggest prefix on here is studying tissues is histology. Other ones that I know we're going to look through, and you'll see this later when we get into skeletal system too, because we're going to be looking at cartilage. Anything that has chondr in it means cartilage. Otherwise, epi means on, squamous means scale-like, endo within, meso is middle, pseudo means false, exo means outside, anything blast, because you're going to see that in a lot of units. Blast means to build something. They both start with a B. Osteo has something to do with bones. You'll see that later when we get into the bone unit. Anything that starts with an A means without or not. I think that was on the last one as well. Glia is kind of a weird one. Means glue. And anything that ends in trophy means nourishing. Like, have you heard of atrophy before? This means, the word itself means without nourishing. Usually stuff starts to shrink up and go away. All right, so looking at tissues. Now, all of our body cells are specialized for what they do, all to maintain homeostasis so we don't change. Tissues are just a group of cells. So we're done talking to cells. You can see how we're like, oh, we're going from cells, now we're going into tissues, then what comes after tissues? Organs, and that's when we're going to start getting into various organ systems, talking about the different organs in them. But a tissue is a group of cells that are similar in structure, similar in structure that perform common or related functions to each other. And yes, the study of tissues is histology. So tissues are just a bunch of cells that are all working together to do something in particular. Now, there are 4 types of tissue or 4 classifications of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. These are all kind of like one-word descriptions after it that kind of broadly says what their functions are. That epithelial tissue covers something, and it has some more specific functions based on the different types of epithelial tissue. Connective tissue is a type of support type of tissue. Muscle tissue produces movement. And nervous tissue does some type of control. Now, most organs in our body have a combination of multiple tissues. And it's kind of how much of which type of tissue depends on the organ. And I'm like, so it's usually not just this one organ has this one type of tissue and that's it. I'm like, it's usually a combination of the tissues altogether. Now, this is just showing, yes, we've got tissues all over our body. We've got nervous tissue in your brain, in your spinal cord, in your nerves. There's several different types of muscle tissue. There is epithelial tissue. It lists a whole bunch of different things and all the different things it does. And then lots and lots of different types of connective tissue. Now, this slide just gave you the one word, you know what it does. This gives you a little more description, and we'll get into it as we start talking about the individual tissues. Starting with the first, the epithelial tissue. Now, since epithelial tissue, its one word definition is to cover, yes, it forms a boundary. And I'm like, between something, if you cover something, now you've got, outside and inside. I'm like, if you cover up your car at night, if you've got a fancy car, you cover it up. Now you've got the boundary between outside and inside. So it's going to cover something. One of the big examples that we're going to look at, our skin is a type of epithelial tissue. It covers us. It performs it forms a great boundary outside of body, inside of body. Covers a lot of our organs, outside of the organ, inside of the organ. So it does a lot of covering to form those boundaries. Now, the 2 main types, we have the covering and lining epithelia, whether it's on your skin or whether it's inside on one of your organs. And we also have glandular epithelial, because in this particular epithelial, there is secretory tissue in the glands. What do you think secretory tissue does? It secretes things, mostly because glands are generally making something. We have sweat glands. They make something and they're going to secrete it. And so in our glands, we have another type of tissue known as glandular epithelial or secretory tissue. Now, bunch of different functions of epithelial tissue. Yes, it covers. However, it protects, it absorbs, it filters. There's excretion, secretion, as well as sensory reception. Now, depending on the type of epithelial tissue you'll focus on one or more of these, generally not all of them. So not every epithelial tissue does all 5 of those, 6 of those. But some do multiple, so they kind of spread it amongst the epithelial tissue. Lots of functions, though. Now, epithelial tissue is stuck to each other. Since you're covering something, all of these cells, since tissue is made up of cells, have to be connected together. So they have to closely fit together, and they form one big continuous sheet. Now, there are lateral contacts. That just means side to side. So one cell is stuck on its side to another cell, or stuck on its side to another cell. And the two main things that hold cells next to each other are tight junctions and desmosomes. The tight junction, I was going to say, on here it almost looks like there's like a little inward. They kind of weave itself in on the cell. And desmosomes are these blue or they're not blue. Well, the blue part and this little yellow, these proteins on the side. Now, does your skin have these? Yes, when it's an epithelial tissue and it covers, it has these. Now, a lot of times it's not very evident because if you scratch away at your skin, you generally don't see it coming off in sheets. It's usually one cell at a time. But it's, the skin itself, as you're looking at it, is held together by these tight junctions and gap junctions. When is the rare time that your skin does come off in sheets? After a sunburn. So the next time you peel, and I'm like, that's because you're kind of prematurely making your skin come off. All those skin cells are still stuck together with tight junctions and desmosomes. So when you're peeling this summer, you'll sound all smart. Like, look at all those desmosomes and tight junctions holding all your skin cells together, and you can peel them off. Now, naming of epithelial. All epithelial tissues have two words in their name, or two names. The first always indicates how many cell layers there are. If it's a simple epithelial, it has a single layer of cells. If it's a stratified epithelial, it has two or more layers of cells. The shape can change, and we'll talk about that between those multiple layers. But the first word of any type of epithelial tissue is always going to be simple or stratified. Always. The second word will tell you which shape the cells are. They're either going to be squamous. What does squamous sound, or what does squamous mean? What is it? Irregular or scale-like. I was going to say, you were a Monday's now. Irregular shaped cell. It's not a perfect circle. Not that that's a perfect circle. It's irregular shaped. And now sometimes it could be flattened as well. That's irregularly shaped. And then we stick a nucleus in the middle of it. And they look like my little eggs. That's a squamous shaped cell. It's irregular shaped. It means scale, like a fish scale. Fish scales are irregular shaped. If you've ever looked at a fish scale in a microscope. What shape is cuboidal? Cube shaped. So nice and square. Columnar. Tall columns. So in all epithelial tissue, it would have two names. The first name tells you how many layers it is. The second name tells you what shape the cells are. Now, but in your stratified epithelial, where you have lots and lots of cells, yes, two or more, sometimes it could be 30 or 100 cell layers thick, sometimes they change shape from the bottom layer to the top layer. And so I'm like, at the bottom, they may look cuboidal. At the top, they may look squamous. So which one do we call it? Any guess? I think it says. Maybe not. Well, it says an apical layer. You'd have to look ahead. What apical layer means. It's the top layer. We don't care what the cell looks like at the bottom. We care what the cell looks like at the top. So they're looking a little, kind of imaginative, a little more square-like. And as you see it, as they get to the top, they start getting squished. They don't look like a cube whatsoever anymore. They start to squish down. So we name it based on what that top layer is. This is just showing what they can look like. A squamous is scale-like, irregular shaped. A lot of times they get flattened. And because they're flattened, the nucleus is also flattened. So it's also flattened. A cuboidal cell, it's a cube-shaped, it's a box-like. And the nucleus is generally pretty round. In a columnar cell, they are tall and column-shaped, hence their name. And their nucleus is also stretched out. So whatever happens to the cell, if it squishes, the nucleus squishes. If it's, stretches, the nucleus stretches as well. Now, looking at a couple different types of epithelial tissue. The very first one is a simple squamous. We're not going to look at all of them, I don't think. Based on its name, what can you tell me? Simple squamous. One cell layer thick. And it's flattened or it's kind of weird, regular shaped. There's not a lot of cytoplasm. That's the fluid inside the cell because it's all squished. And the general, you're going to have a simple squamous, or usually any type of simple tissue, one single layer thick, where you want stuff to be able to get in and out or across that cell quickly. And so you're going to find these cells where you want lots of diffusion, stuff moving across the cells. Kidneys and your lungs. In your lungs, you want to be able to get that oxygen and carbon dioxide across very quickly. In your kidneys, where you have lots of filtering of blood, you want to be able to get those blood and the nutrients across that cells very quickly as well. This will look familiar. It will either be a review from Monday, because it's the exact same slide from your lab. It will look be a preview if you got lab today of the exact same slide for your lab as well. So different functions, again, it's anytime we want filtration to happening or diffusion. One cell thick. And the dark staining purple things, that is the nucleus. It's one cell thick. They're all kind of irregular shaped. A lot of them are kind of squished. But that is looking inside of your lungs. You want to be able to get that oxygen and carbon dioxide across very, very quickly. Now, the simple squamous epithelium, other than lungs and kidneys, there are two other locations of simple squamous. There's endothelium and mesothelium. What does endo mean? Not outside, inside. And so we're going to find these, it literally means inside. It's the inner coverings of various things. And it's an inner covering of lymphatic vessels, blood vessels, and the heart. So it's not just kidneys and lungs. It's not just for gas exchange or diffusion of blood. Sometimes we want this as a covering, because that's what a lot of epithelial does. It covers. And so endothelium covers lymphatic vessels, blood vessels, and the heart. Mesothelium, what's meso mean? You might have to look back. Means middle. They both start with an M. This is the epithelium of your serous membranes in the ventral body cavity. This comes down to the first lab. Your serous membranes are your visceral and parietal membranes. So I'm like, whether it's the visceral parietal pericardium, visceral parietal, the pleural, these are your serous membranes of the ventral body cavity. Those are made up of simple squamous. It's a lining, it's only, it's single cell thick. The next type of tissue we have is simple cuboidal. Again, based on its name, single layer, based on cuboidal, tells us its shape. A lot of the simple cuboidal is for secretion and absorption. We do not find simple cuboidal very often in our body. It's not in very many places. The main place you're going to find it is in your kidneys, in the tubules of the kidneys. There's little tiny tubes in there. And they form just the smallest ducts of glands in your kidney tubules. There's not a lot of simple cuboidal. So this is looking at some of those ducts. This would be a hole, and we just, one of the ducts that stuff can go through it, and we just sliced it. These are your cuboidal. Some, yes, get squeezed a little bit as they go around. But they are pretty cubish shaped. Single layer secretion and absorption can go across that single layer. Simple columnar, still single layer. Lots of cells, all tight, packed together. Since it's single layered, also absorption and secretion. Now, you're usually going to find the simple columnar, in your digestive tract. And so when we get in, start talking and looking at digestive system, you'll be looking at some of these slides again on microscopes. Now, because they work in absorption and secretion, on your cell, what on your cell could increase surface area for absorption and secretion? Microvilli. So some of your cells have, my microvilli. A lot of these then are going to have, make them taller. those simple columnar on there as well. And I'm like, it's single layers. They can easily get into those microvilli across that one single layer. Here's a picture of, again, very tall cells. They are one right next to each other, and their nucleus itself is also stretched out. We find lots of them in the digestive tract, various parts of the digestive system. We also find them in the uterus as well. And a lot of these cells, especially in the digestive tract, and we'll get into again in the digestive system, have these cool things called goblet cells. They make mucus. Then there's also something known as pseudo-stratified columnar epithelial. What does pseudo mean? False. So it means false stratified columnar epithelial. So it looks stratified, but it is not stratified. It's single layered. So the reason why it looks stratified, the cells are only one cell thick, but they vary in height. Some are taller, some are shorter. And so you're going to see these nucleus stacked up in different levels, but it's only still one cell thick. And so it looks, as you see nucleus all over, you think cells are stacked on top of each other. So it looks stratified, but it's not. Since it's still single layered, lots of absorption and secretion, this is what it's talking about. When they look like they're stacked up on top of each other, this looks like it should be like 3 or more layers thick. It's not. It's just this cell is like only this high, where this one's skinny and it goes all the way to the top. So they just look stratified, but it's not. Now onto the stratified. These are 2 or more. And if we have 2 or more cell layers, they always start at the bottom and work their way up. So the very bottom, the basal cells, the base, that's where the name comes from, divide, the cells go to the top. It is more durable than simple epithelium. If you are one cell thick, it does not take much to damage you. So when we have more than one layer, you're a little more durable. And so protection is their major role. The most common one is stratified squamous epithelial, because we're going to look at this one in lab. It's the most widespread. The very top surface, that apical layer, is squamous shaped. However, a lot of time, the very bottom layers are cuboidal or columnar. But because the top layer is squamous shaped, we call it stratified squamous, because we don't care what the bottom layers look like. We only care what the top layer looks like. These are usually located in areas for wear and tear, where there's lots of abrasion, where things could be scratched. The biggest example, your skin is made up of stratified squamous. If I scratch my skin right now, am I doing any permanent damage? No, I hope not. No, I can lose a few cell layers just fine. It's not going to be a big deal whatsoever. It's wear and tear. You're going to have lots of abrasion. Those that are farthest from the basal layer, the top layer of your cells, they are less viable. We'll look at that in lab 2 with your skin. The bottom layer of your skin cells, they're undergoing mitosis. As they go to the surface, which is what you're looking at and scratching at, they die. When I scratch away, I'm not scratching living cells. They are all dead at this point. So they are less viable near the top. So the biggest example, and that's what this is a picture of, is the stratified squamous. Again, they can start, sometime columnar and cuboidal shape, but by the time they get to the bottom, they have flattened. Their nucleus flattens out. This is stratified squamous that's in the esophagus. Lots of wear and tear in the esophagus. You've probably all chewed on a, Dorito or a cracker, and you didn't chew it very long, and you swallowed, and it scratches going all the way down. That's okay. You did not do any permanent damage. It may hurt, but you did not do any permanent damage. Same thing. You may have all drank some really super hot coffee or really hot chocolate, and you felt a burn going down. That's okay. You've got that stratified squamous epithelium in your esophagus. You can lose a few cell layers, and it's just fine. So you're going to find these anywhere where you're going to find, anywhere where there's wear and tear. Your skin, an example is one. Stratified cuboidal is a lot rarer. When I say stratified, it's usually only 2 cells thick. It's not multiple cells. It's 2 and 2 only. And the only places you find them is in some sweat and mammary glands. We don't even have a picture of them. They're rare. We don't care about them as much, but it is where sometimes there's two cuboidal cells stacked on top of each other. Stratified columnar. It's a little more common than stratified cuboidal. However, there's still not a lot. Some of the places we find it in our pharynx, the male urethra, some glandular ducts, and then sometimes it's found in transition areas as we're going from one type of tissue to another type of tissue. Sometimes you find this stratified columnar. Also rare, so I don't have a picture of it. The glandular epithelial, as we said, it's found in your glands. A gland is just one or more types of cells that makes and secretes an aqueous fluid, watery fluid. We call it a secretion. So a gland is going to make something and secrete it. Now, it is classified by where that product goes. If it's an endocrine, what does endo mean? It means in, exo, out. An endocrine means that this secretion is going to stay in the body. And an exocrine means it could be secreted outside of an organ or outside of the body. It's also classified by the number of cells that form the gland. There are some glands, one cell, that's all they are, and they make something. So they're a gland, one cell gland. The example is a goblet cell, if I'm going to go back. This is one cell. It's a goblet cell, and it makes mucus. One cell, it's a gland, because it's making something and secreting something. It can be one cell thick. Not all of them are one cell thick, most of them are not. But most of them are multicellular, secreting things like our sweat glands and our sebaceous glands that make all that oil, which we're going to look at in lab as well. But I'm like, it's based on how many numbers of cells there are. Now, endocrine glands, these are the ones that secrete fluids and that stay inside of the body. They do not have any ducts. Not like quack quack, but with a T at the end. They do not have a duct. So anything they make just goes into the neighboring fluid. Generally, the way that whatever they make goes to wherever it wants to go is that fluid, their secretion goes into the blood supply or into the into lymph tissue, and that goes to wherever it needs to go in the body. Now, the endocrine glands, that in itself forms an entire system, the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a whole bunch of glands making lots of different substances that stay inside of our body, generally hormones. That's the biggest one. So they're generally making hormones that stay in our body, and they travel around through blood and lymph tissue and makes your body do something. An example of an endocrine gland is the pancreas. What does the pancreas make? What hormone? Insulin. And that insulin travels around through the blood supply, and it makes your body respond in some particular way, like decreasing blood sugar. That's an endocrine gland. There is no duct that secretion, that insulin has to travel through. That gland makes it, just leaves the gland and goes straight into the blood supply. An exocrine gland is going to leave into the body, so out of the body completely, or at least it's going to go into the body cavity, but it's going to leave and go into some other area, which means these are now going to have ducts that they have to travel through. So they can't just make their secretion and then it's going to travel somewhere else. They have to go into a duct, and the duct sends that secretion out wherever it needs to go. There are way more exocrine glands than there are endocrine glands. Some examples: mucus, sweat glands, oil glands, salivary glands. These are all glands that make and secrete something, and they have a duct that the secretion has to travel through. Now, some review, at least of epithelial tissue. Which of the following relationships between a tissue and its general, one-word function is not correct? It is the pink. Epithelial does not have to do with digestion. What is the one word for digestion, or for epithelial? Covers. An area in the body exposed to the external environment would be composed of which of the following tissue types? This is the only one we've been talking about so far anyways. Which of the following types of epithelial tissue is best suited for areas of the body where diffusion and filtration occur? Most people, just by looking, are like, well, it's at least one of the simple ones, and it is. It is the yellow, the simple squamous. What would be an example of where you'd find in the body simple squamous? In the lungs. What is the major distinction between an endocrine and exocrine gland? The major distinction between an endocrine and an exocrine gland is that endocrine glands secrete their product into what? It is pink. It goes straight into blood or lymph. It just goes straight into some other type of fluid. So lots of type of epithelial tissue. Lots of type of connective tissue. Again, there are 4 types of tissues. Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. We did the one. On to the second one. There's lots of information about epithelial and connective, not as much about the other 2. Connective tissue is the most abundant and widely distributed of the 4 types of tissue. However, in the organs, the amount varies. For example, in your skin, you have lots and lots of connective tissue. In your nervous system, so in your brain, you have very little connective tissue. You have some there, so you've got a lot of this connective tissue in a lot of different organs and found in a lot of different areas, but how much just varies. And there are 4 main classes of connective tissue. So there's 4 types of tissue, and then connective tissue being one of them. And of the connective tissue, since it's so, diverse, we have 4 classes of connective tissue. The first one is connective tissue proper. This is right out of your book. It's table 4.1. This is one of the 4 types, is your connective tissue proper. It gives some examples of some of your connective tissue proper. It's loose connective tissue, like areolar tissue and adipose tissue, and dense irregular and dense regular connective tissue. That's all connective tissue proper. Now, it's a lot of fats, a lot of different types of tissues, a lot of things you find in ligaments. We'll get to. Then there's bone, and then there's blood. Out of the 4 types, connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood, when you look at them, do they look like they have anything in common? Not really. And they're kind of diverse. We're like, well, cartilage and bone maybe, but blood's kind of out there, and you're still like, well, I don't know what connective tissue proper is. They're a very diverse group of different types of tissue. The connective tissue proper is its own little group with different types of tissue we find in it. Before I get into the connective tissue proper, just some basic functions of connective tissue. First, you remember the one word for connective tissue. It's support, and that's part of the thing. Binding and support, so connecting things. Protection, for insulating. Which type of connective tissue do you think insulates? Any guess? Close? Adipose, because what is adipose tissue? Fat. And so that's kind of the insulator of the ones. Same thing. Storing reserve fuel, also an adipose type of tissue. Transporting substances, kind of your blood tissue. It's kind of got its own unique function. But they're all also going to have some binding support. Yes, there's even binding and support even in blood. which we'll talk about how that does that. You know, there's protection functions of blood as well, but some of these are kind of specific for only blood. Now, things that make something connective tissue. So you are connective tissue if you have these three things. A ground substance. This is some type of gel-like substance that you find in the tissue. That's what ground substance means, a gel-like substance. You find fibers, and you find cells. So if you have these three things, you are connective tissue. Now, how much you have of these three things and what it looks like and how it's shaped, well, that kind of depends on what type of connective tissue you are. But if you have ground substance, this gel-like material, you have fibers and you have cells, you are connective tissue. Now, ground substance, again, this is that gel-like material. This is the fluid that fills the space between cells. So it's the fluid that you find in between the cells. What you find in this gel-like ground substance, you find interstitial fluid. Just it's the fluid between the cells. It's an aqueous solution. And you find lots and lots of proteins, specifically cell adhesion proteins. What does it mean to be adhesive? Is like, to what would you say? Yeah, to stick. That's why tape is an adhesive. It sticks. And so lots of proteins that are going to help all of this type of tissue stick together, help the cells stick together, help all the fibers stick together. It's the glue for attaching all of this together. Now, the three types of fibers, because again, you have to have ground substance, fibers, and cells. There are three types of fibers. So again, connective tissue, you have to have the gel-like ground substance, you have to have fiber, and you have to have a type of cell. The three types of fibers you could have all three of them, you could have one of them, you could have two of them, and an all complete different balance. You could have a collagen type of fiber. It is the strongest and most abundant type of all three of them. Based on its name, yes, it's made of a collagen protein. It's the toughest and strongest of all of them, and so it provides high tensile strength, which means it's not going to stretch. And if you pull it too much, it will tear. You're going to find this in a lot of your ligaments. If you pull too much on a ligament, it will tear. They are very strong. Collagen fibers, you know, looking at width, a collagen fiber width for width is stronger than steel. It's a very strong fiber. Then we have elastic fibers made of elastin. I'm going to say elastic fibers made of elastin, very long, thin elastin fibers that allows them to stretch and recoil. It's just like a rubber band. Rubber bands are elastic. You can pull it, and then it stretches and goes right back. And so some of our tissues, we can stretch, and they go right back. Like some of the places we have this in our body, our lungs, every time you breathe, it stretches, goes right back. Then we have reticular fibers. They are short, they're very thin, and they have lots of branched collagenous fibers. Even though it says collagenous, you're like, oh, so it's also made of collagen? There is some collagen in it, but structurally and chemically it is different than straight collagen. They offer a little more give. Collagen fibers themselves cannot stretch very much at all. Reticular fibers, although they have some collagen in them, structurally-wise, they've got a little more give. They can stretch a little bit. So this you're going to find around a lot of your organs. Your organs can stretch. They can bump, you know, and get bumped into. They can move around a little bit without doing any permanent damage. And the third thing to be connective tissue is you have to have cells. Generally, you've got lots and lots of blast cells. You remember what blast means? To build. These are your building cells, and so you'll see a lot of words that have blast in it as we go through different units. Blast cells, these are immature. They're mitotically active. They're undergoing mitosis. They're building as you undergo through mitosis and cell division. They make lots of that ground substance, lots of the gel. They make lots of fibers. Again, they are building. If you're building something, you got to lay down kind of the ground floor, and lots of fibers. Fibroblasts, these are builders of fibers, like their name means. They make lots of fibers in connective tissue proper type tissues. Chondroblasts, these are cells that make lots of cartilage. Osteoblasts, cells that make bone. We also have blast cells, hematopoietic stem cells. There is an alternate blast name for it. I can't remember it offhand. Megakaryoblast, something like that. It's another type of blast cell that makes bone marrow. And then we also have site cells. It's kind of like the repetition. Site means what? Cell. And so I'm like, our site cells. These are your mature cells. If something ends in site, we're talking that is the mature form of that cell. They just maintain. They're not building anything. They're not breaking anything down. They are just maintaining. So a chondrocyte is a mature cartilage cell, just hanging out as some cartilage. An osteocyte, a mature bone cell. Now, one of the types of connective tissue, I'm like, so we have kind of our, we've got lots of types of connective tissue, but one of the types of connective tissue we have is cartilage. And there are different types of cartilage. Somewhere on here. Well, I guess we don't. I thought I had a picture, but maybe not later in the unit. Cartilage tissue is going to have chondroblasts and chondrocytes. Because what does chondro mean? Cartilage. You've got cartilage building cells and you have mature cartilage cells. Our cartilage tissue is tough, yet flexible. It lacks nerve fibers. This is why I'm like, what are some places in your body that you can think of that have cartilage? Your nose? Your ears? Your ribs? Now, your nose and your ears, they're made up of cartilage. They lack nerve fibers. This is why a lot of people pierce them. Yes, there's some. It doesn't mean they don't have any, but I'm like, they lack very few nerve fibers. It doesn't hurt quite as much. And I'm like, versus if you pierce something else. You're not going to pierce your hand somewhere. It's going to have lots of nerve endings, and it's going to hurt a lot. Your nose and your ear are made up of different types of cartilage. They hurt less for piercing. Now, they are also made up of 80% water, which means they can rebound after compression. So if I squish on my nose, what's going to happen when I release it? It will hopefully pop right back. Same thing with your ear. You can bend it, and it should go right back. That's because there's water in there that you can bend water. The water is going to make it go right back to its normal shape. That's the different types of cartilage in there. It is avascular. It does not have major blood vessels going through there. It may have some capillaries, but it gets most of its nutrients from surrounding tissues. Because it doesn't have major blood vessels going there, it also makes it an ideal place for piercing noses and piercing ears, because you'd have very little blood if there is any. The problem with it, when you don't have lots of blood supply and you don't have lots of nutrients, it does take longer to heal. And I'm like, so anytime you have damage to any type of cartilage, because it has very little blood supply, bringing lots of nutrients to it, any type of cartilage damage takes longer to heal. And altogether, there are 3 types of cartilage. There is hyaline cartilage. You're generally going to find this on the ends of bones. So you'll see that when we get into bones next week. Elastic cartilage, what do you think? Why do you think we call it that? Yeah, it's kind of made of that elastic tissue. Like if I move my ears, you find it in your ears. And I'm like, it's made of elastic. I can move it and it bends right back. And fibrocartilage, why do you think they call it that? The fibro? What do you think it has lots of? Fibers. So it's generally a more durable or tough type of cartilage because of all the fibers that are in it. Places you're going to find that in your knee, in between your vertebrae, places that are undergoing a lot of stress and strain on them, they need to be strong. Third type of connective tissue is bone tissue, also known as osseous tissue. It supports and protects your body structures. Yes, you're going to find bone around some of the most important organs you have in your body. You find bone in your skull. What's inside there? Your brain. We have ribs, this whole rib cage here. Because what's inside here? Your lungs and your heart. And we've got bones protecting lots of our body structures. kind of the more important body structures, the more bone there is to protect it. Also inside of our bone, there is fat. Yes, there's fat inside your bones. It also helps make blood cells in some of the empty cavities there. We'll look at more of that next week. There's more collagen than there is cartilage. Your bones themselves are not like bending and flexible. There is a little bit of flexibility to it. There's lots of osteoblasts that are making the bone. There's lots of osteocytes that are just maintaining the bone. And the fourth type of connective tissue, this is still all connective tissue. Fourth type of connective tissue is blood. It is the most atypical connective tissue because it's not like a big structure you can look at. It's not as hard substance. It's a fluid, so it makes it kind of its own unique tissue. That yes, a fluid can be a tissue. Because what are the three things you have to be tissue? Or connective tissue? What's one of them? The ground substance? Cells and fibers. And blood has all three of those. And so it is a connective tissue. It has ground substance. It's got a gel-like material, plasma. It has cells. There's white blood cells. There's platelets. There's red blood cells. And it has fibers. The main time you're going to see these fibers is when your blood is clotting. Now, Mike, you've got all these fibroblasts. Their name, Mike, we find in the blood that are helping with blood clotting. So since it has fibers, at least during the clotting process, it has cells and it has ground substance, your plasma, it is a connective tissue. Its main job, it transports. It's how information can get from one part of the body to the other part of the body. It's how nutrients get around, gases get around, wastes get around, all through blood. Lots of connective tissue, very unique connective tissue. Muscle tissue, not quite as unique. There's not lots of varieties. There are three. Now it is highly vascularized. What do you think it means? Lots of blood supply. Any guess why we want lots of blood supply to muscles? Lots of oxygen and lots of nutrients. And like for your muscles to contract, you need lots of oxygen and they need lots of sugar. Now I'm like, so you need lots of nutrients and lots of oxygen. It is responsible for most types of movements, and there are three types of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue, found in skeletal muscle. Where do you think you find skeletal muscle? Attached to bones. It is voluntary in nature. That means you can control your skeletal muscle. I can tell myself to move my arm right now, and it's doing that. I can control that. That's what it means to be voluntary in nature. Your cardiac muscle tissue, the only place you find it in your body is in your heart. It is involuntary. I can't make my heart beat. I can't make it speed up. I can't make it slow down. There are things I could do to try to help slow it down, but I can't control my heart, which is fine. Otherwise, what would happen when you slept? You die. And so it's good that it does its own thing all by itself. It's involuntary. Smooth muscle tissue is found in hollow organs other than the heart. Your digestive system, your blood vessels. And it's even in your eyeballs. And any type of, other hollow organs, usually means there's fluid or something inside of them, all made up of smooth muscle. Involuntary nature, which means you cannot control it. It's kind of one of those, it's, most of your digestive tract is made up of smooth muscle. You can control yourself swallowing. After you swallow, do you have any control over your food? Nope. It goes through a whole digestive tract all on its own. That's a smooth muscle that's doing that. Now what happens to all of these? Oh, we got one more. Nervous tissue. Main component of the nervous system. Where you're going to find nervous tissue? Brain, spinal cord, and nerves. The nervous tissue is part of the nervous system. There are two types of cells that we find in nervous tissue. Neurons and neuroglia cells. Neurons, when we get into the nervous system, we'll get more into these. Neurons, these are the cells that are sending information. They can generate and conduct nerve impulses or electrical impulses. So they're the ones that are sending electricities, they're sending information. What does glia mean? Glue. The word neuroglia means nerve glue. These are the cells that hold it all together. These are support cells. So they support, insulate, and protect the neurons so the neurons can do their job. Now, what happens to it as we end in most of my units on aging sucks, and this is why. Tissue-wise, why aging sucks. Most of your tissues function just fine throughout most of your life. As you start to get older, things start to happen. Your epithelial tissue starts to thin as you get older. That even includes your skin. That's a stratified squamous epithelial, which means it can be easily breached. It can easily tear. Any of your simple squamous, same thing. And your lungs can get damaged a whole lot easier. Tissue repair is less efficient. It takes longer to heal. If you get a cut right now, it might not take you very long to heal. If someone that's 90 years old gets a cut, it could take them weeks for that cut to heal. Your bone tissue, your muscle tissue, and your nervous tissue all begins to atrophy. Now the word itself means without nourishment. And I'm like, if you don't have enough nourishment, you kind of start to shrink and shrivel. Starts to die. It's not good. Now we'll talk about muscle tissue. At least your skeletal muscle is one of those ones where, yes, naturally as you get older, your skeletal muscle starts to get smaller. But what can you do to try to offset that? You can work out. That's why they try to encourage elderly people, just do something. Because naturally as you get older, and I'm like, it starts to go away. And with anything as we get older, the DNA that's found inside all of the cells in the tissues, DNA mutations and damage can happen, which generally leads to increase of cancer in any cell, in any tissue, which then goes to any organ. And I'm like, so as you get older, your chances of cancer go up, like in any type of tissue. Yay! It's always joyous. There's never anything good about aging. All right, some review. You would expect to find these types of fibers in areas that undergo a lot of stretch and rebound. Yes, the elastic. Which of these is not paired correctly? And I don't think I talked about striations. We'll see if my Monday lab people got it. Although if I look at the answer, I don't care about striations. Yes, cardiac muscle is not voluntary. You cannot control it. And which of these is incorrect regarding increasing age in older adults? Yeah, there's never a decreased risk of cancer. It always seems to go up. Yay! Oops, I don't want that.